identify what you're already doing well. So it might be handy if you had a paper and pen or a document open where you can note what's working well and what you might need some further support with. So really the focus of today is identify what's working well, examine some inclusive teaching, learning and assessment practices that can be used every day in every subject, and then learn about a range of accessibility tools with Fiona, such as immersive reader, dictate, video and audio submission in assignments, reading progress and reading coach, to name but a few. I know I probably missed a few there, Fiona. All right. So the aim of my part of the session, obviously it's not going to be possible in 30 minutes to cover a very broad range of strategies. The focus of the session is to look at your understanding of what inclusive practice means in your classroom, how your practice can contribute to other key personnel supporting students with additional needs. And although I'm not a particular fan of the term inspection ready, because we know we do what we do to support our students, it's not just a tick the box exercise for potential inspections, but should you get notice of an inspection, you'll feel confident that you can articulate everything that you do to support students in your class. So what is inclusive practice and what do we mean by that? I think in a nutshell, to me, it means responsive teaching. The ways in which teachers consider the differences among their students in relation to ability, aptitude, interests and experience. And they deploy a wide range of strategies, techniques and approaches that are used to support student learning and help every student to achieve and realise his or her potential. A key word that stands out to me here is approaches we use to support student learning, as this encompasses more than just the what and how we teach subject content. Just another note on inclusive practice again, to reiterate that it's more about what you teach and how you teach it. It's the physical environment of your classroom, it's your approach to classroom management, and it's about building relationships. And inclusive practice is embedded in what you do every day for every student in every class, and it benefits every learner. So again, your physical layout, the content, the process, how you teach it, how you ask questions, the tasks and homework that you set, how you set up your assessments and exams, and your approach to classroom management. So in a nutshell, it's a responsive approach to the needs in your classroom, whereby you offer variety, choice and options. So these are based on the students' strengths, needs and talents. So I'm just going to leave that slide sit there for a minute and let you have a read of it. Just to say that a little note on the categories of special educational needs and additional educational needs. There really has been a seismic shift in practice in the last 5 years in this regard. And throughout the session, you're going to see the terms SEN, ALN and AEN used interchangeably. And that actually reflects the new model that came out in 2017. For simplicity, I'm just going to mostly be using the term additional needs or presenting needs, as it's broader and it encompasses a very wide range of needs in our classroom. Also, when I refer to an inclusive approach, I am also referring to EAL learners and students from all cultures and backgrounds. So when we're asked in our class who has additional needs, for many years, our immediate thought would be who has dyslexia, who has numeracy issues, who has ADHD, autism, dyspraxia, physical and sensory issues, and so on. And it's absolutely still important that we know that information. However, under the new model, we're asked to focus on what that actually means in terms of their needs in the classroom. For example, I'm sure we've all had a student who we may have been told has, say, ADHD, but maybe the nature of your subject means they're fine in your classroom. Maybe they're thriving because they're in a subject room that, you know, naturally has lots of moving around. Or we may not realise that many students with a diagnosis, say, of dyspraxia could also be highly likely to have associated anxiety. So I've just, again, the areas of need identified on that slide, they come from the new model of support and the NEPS continuum. And they both encourage us to focus on the need as it presents in your classroom and what we can do to support students with those needs. I'm going to work through a couple of real life kind of example targets based on some of these needs and briefly cover tips for each one. However, the main focus today is to look at a broad approach to teaching and learning that will benefit all. And an awful lot of what Fiona is going to cover later on will address ways in which the digital tools can support students with literacy or language issues. At a glance, you can see how the needs on the last slide can be very easily layered onto the key skills of the junior cycle. So by creating an inclusive classroom, we're embedding these skills and we're empowering students to become independent learners while they're with us for 5 or 6 years. And we're giving them tools to succeed later in life, whether it be in the world of work or the world of further or higher ed. Okay, so what is my role as a subject teacher? And what are my responsibilities? And again, the two kind of quotes that I've left there on the slide, they come from the new model. They're taken from the 2017 guidelines. You'll also note here that causes of concern or need are referred to in broader terms like application, motivation, communication, or interaction with peers, rather than focus on specific categories of assessed need. All right. So in order to support students with additional learning needs every day, what do we need to know? We need to know who in our class has additional needs and how that might present in our subject area. We need to have a sense of how the overall system of delivering support works so we can work within that framework in the school and meet our responsibilities. And should there be a subject, whole school or SEN inspection, and this is really important, we need to be able to articulate and demonstrate how we make provision for students in our class. It's also, I suppose, you probably hear this back in your own schools as well. You've heard mention of the NEPS continuum of support. I'm just going to briefly mention it and leave that slide sit there where you can see that support for students occurs across a continuum in the same way that their needs occur across a continuum. But what I do like about this document is that it clearly outlines our role and responsibilities as teachers. So this framework kind of enables schools to identify and respond to needs in a flexible way. Today, we're focusing mainly on the support for all stage because it concentrates on the process of prevention, effective mainstream teaching and early identification. But throughout the presentation, I'm also going to reference how you as a subject teacher can support those accessing interventions on the support for some and the support for a few levels that are there in the red and green. And we look at a couple of real life examples. So in short, if you have students in your class with presenting or emerging needs, what can you do? So with all of that information in mind, this is where we kind of start our mini audit of what we're doing. And we're going to start by giving ourselves credit for what we're already doing well. So now might be a good time if you want to start jotting down some examples of what you're doing well or what you might like to tweak as we go along. Again, don't be put off too much by the word differentiation across that slide because it can be interpreted in many ways. And I could give the full half an hour today just debating that word as it's being discussed out in the ether at the moment. But in essence, if you plan your classes taking into consideration differences among your students and use a variety of approaches and strategies to support the students, essentially you are differentiating for students with additional needs. So ask yourself the following questions. Am I aware of the students in my class who might need additional help? Do I make an assumption as to what they might need based on their diagnosis or need or label? Or do I look at the presenting need in my subject? Are they enjoying my class? Do they engage? Are they challenged? Do I use a variety of methodologies? Can I say there's something for everyone in my classes? Do they hand up homework regularly? Are they doing as well as they can be in their assessments, tests and exams? And do I offer options and choice? And we'll do a lot more on that later. Am I flexible in my approach? So if you answer yes to most of those questions, then your practice is already inclusive. And some of that might seem a little bit utopian. I know I always battle to get my own students to hand up homework on time. But on reflection now, my approach to setting homework tasks needed work. If I were back in my school in the morning, I would definitely offer more choice and more options to students. All right. So how can I support my students? Well, a reflective practice approach. So if you take a look, first of all, at the basics, how your classroom is set up, you look at the content of your lesson. What do I want them to learn and understand? You look at your process. How do you teach it or how do you facilitate independent learning? And what's your approach to classroom management? And you look at the product, classwork, homework and assessments. In a nutshell there you see content, process and product, and later on Fiona's going to show you a range of tools that enhance inclusivity and accessibility across all of these stages. So the basics then, and you'll see that I have mentioned seating plan, lighting, ventilation, heating and organisation. You might be wondering why I'm giving these time in a half-hour session, but might you have easily identified these as examples of inclusive practice? But if you can say that your seating plan has taken into account the child who needs to be near the front, or maybe sitting with a trusted friend might alleviate anxiety, or pairing students together who have different skill sets and can help each other. For the student with social or communication challenges, are they sitting with peers who understand it and can support them? If you had a flickering light or a blown bulb or a noisy radiator, this might be unsettling a child with sensory issues. One question would be, do you like to teach with an open door? Might the noise from the corridor or distractions of passers-by make it harder for a child with concentration or focus issues to stay on task? Is the ventilation or heating in the room causing discomfort for students or yourself? And if so, have you brought this to the attention of management? So again, just to move on there to organisation, it might seem like a very obvious one, but does your classroom environment and organisation support students who have, if you think back to the slide on areas of need, they might have self-management issues or organisational skills issues? Can students physically get to what they need to find and find it easily? Are bags or equipment causing instructions? If you have physical folders in the room, if you use OneNote, is it really well organised in a way that's actually giving them the tools to succeed because they don't have to spend time looking for things that they can't easily find? So in terms of modelling organisational skills, does my room need an overhaul? Do I need any additional supplies? Are there simple changes or tweaks that I can make that would help them to succeed? And do I need support from school leaders on this? So now that we've addressed the basics in terms of physical setup and organisation of the classroom, let's take a look at what the atmosphere in an inclusive classroom, feels like. Again, you might be wondering why I'm including this today, but I want you to think back again to the slide on areas of need, and what jumps out there is the social and emotional learning, social and communication skills, self-management and behaviour. Do the conditions in your classroom contribute to a positive teaching and learning environment? And also, I know we may have some of our SNA team on here today as well. Just turn off that. The highest percentage of SNA support allocated to students are to students with needs in those areas. And we all know that those needs can be very complex. So by having a responsive approach to classroom management, it is actually inclusive practice in action. So building relationships obviously is a very important part of that. Do you aim to create an atmosphere of trust and mutual support? Are your expectations positive and realistic? Do you note good behaviour and give explicit praise? If you're a school that is interested in restorative practice approach, do you use that to manage conflict, build relationships in the class? And if you're aware of students in your class who have emotional behavioural difficulties, do you use your discretion and flexibility at times to help them comply with the classroom rules? It mightn't always be a straight road to that for them. Do you need to help them along the way a little bit more to get there? All right, so now we're going to have a quick look at choices in terms of how and what you teach and what the students are expected to produce in homework and assessments and how that can contribute to the inclusive classroom. So I'm not going to spend an awful lot of time on universal design for learning around presentations and notes, because you can find a lot of this very easily now by going to websites like ahead.ie, who offer the UDL badge training for educators, dyslexia.ie and the British Dyslexia Association. They have really good kind of tip sheets where you can see at a glance if your presentations that you use in class are accessible and are adhering to the principles of UDL. And by doing that, there's just a few simple examples there on the slide. But if you adhere to those principles, you are essentially future-proofing your resources in terms of accessibility for students with all needs, rather than now trying to retrofit your presentations to a student's need in the class. So it's kind of, what you do now with those presentations will stand to you and you'll have them for a long time. Okay, so offering choice, I've mentioned that a few times as we went along. There's research out there that would tell us that when we offer choice to our pupils in a structured or limited way, it can have a really positive effect on their sense of belonging and their engagement in school. It's not always possible to offer choices sometimes within the work that we have to cover, but where we can, it can really help to alleviate tension and negative attitudes towards school. So examples of offering choice. So think about the choice of activity in work or a lesson, the choice of task within the lesson, a choice of seating or partner. and a choice of how they present their work, whether it be homework or assessment. And obviously, I have a little asterisk beside offering choice in terms of seating. It has to work for you too as a teacher. But by offering choice, you're automatically taking into consideration differences within the class, and you're empowering students to become self-directed learners and play a part in the decision-making process. So when you're offering a choice in how students submit their homework or complete assessments, consider allowing them to hand up work in a variety of formats: written, typed, using dictate, voice recorder, change it into an image, mind maps, and so on. And luckily, the new junior cycle naturally lends itself to this and has made it a bit easier, I think, for teachers to be flexible and responsive in their approach to the type of work that students submit. All right, so just to give you a very, very quick snapshot of CPD that has given us a lot of ideas around inclusive practice. So we've had about 150 of our teachers in WWETB take part in the Magenta Principles programme at MyQs. And what we liked about it is it was full of common sense, practical and grounded advice as to how to be a responsive teacher. And by being responsive, we're automatically being inclusive. All right, so the heart of this approach is, and again, it's a whistle-stop tour of a very large programme. So what are the students required to do to or with the information they received in the classroom? The programme is underpinned by the philosophy that that learning is the consequence of thinking, talking and doing. The Magenta Principles themselves are these kind of list of tasks here, what we ask them to do to or with the information at hand, and this list isn't exhaustive. So I'm just going to hone in on one example to give you an idea in terms of content. The focus here is on reducing content within the class or within homework. So this is just one little kind of task that a lot of our teachers tried. So for some classwork ideas, reduce the chapter into paragraphs, pick out, we all know keywords, but the top 5 most important words and why, the most impactful event and why, as opposed to say, the most important event, just tweaking the language a little bit makes that a very higher order question. The most crucial character or person and why, the most essential tool or equipment and why. So by presenting them with options, it fosters creative thinking and allows them to access the curriculum based on their needs. So just by asking them to justify things and give their rationale, they are thinking, talking, doing and understanding. That's a very whistle-stop tour of what Reduce is like. What we did when we were as part of this programme, a group of participants met for a planning session and we aligned this approach with concrete examples from other CPD that we've been at. So for example, JCT in our subject areas. We also took a look at the NCCA's toolkit for learning called Focus on Learning. So just say, for example, I know you can't see that slide at all now at the moment, but just say we took the principle reduce, and we thought, what examples can we find of that in what we already do? So we found, say, something like using the Diamond 9 and the KWL strategy. They illustrate the principle of reduce. The students are being asked to do something tangible to the information that they get. All right, so how might we apply this approach to the use of questions in class and for homework tasks? So some quick examples, right? So say normally you'd have 20 questions at the end of a chapter. If you say to the students, pick the 5 hardest questions for you tonight, the chances are a lot of students might pick different questions. So they are automatically picking the questions that they need to improve on and they need to work on, rather than every student in the class having to do the same 20 questions. Now, I'd often be asked, will they not just pick the 5 easiest? You might have a few chancers, but generally speaking, if they know they only have to do 5 and you say to them, you pick the 5 that you really feel you need to do the most work on. And if they didn't pick the others, a great follow-up exercise to that in class the next day would be, well, why did nobody pick number 4 or number 7? What made that so easy? It could really get a debate going. How come so many of you picked question 6? What is so tricky about that question? Is there some content I didn't get to in that question that I need to go over with you? Another example, question 9 is very doable. If you were the teacher, how would you make that question more challenging? And the last one there I love, read over the topic or test or quiz for the day as a team. Does it make sense? You have a maximum of 5 questions you are allowed to ask your teacher about this task. All right, we then kind of extended that out and thought about, well, We often spend an awful lot of time planning the content of our classes to make it as inclusive as possible. But do we give the same amount of attention to planning homework that's inclusive? And I know my answer would definitely have been no back at the time. I would have taken out a particular question and said, off you go. So we really liked the idea. We spotted this and we liked the idea of adapting it to our own context, of developing a homework menu for a topic or a chapter or a module. So list all the topics covered this term, rank them in order of difficulty, and devise cue cards. So I'm just honing in on number 3 there. So you're offering a choice, again, based on individual need. You're explicitly teaching study skills, organisational skills, and encouraging independent learning, which again, all link back to the areas of need. So we've had a quick look now at what you can do at classroom level in terms of your content, your process, your product, organisation and classroom management. So I want to finish this part of the session with a little bit on working with colleagues. So can you, if you just think to yourself, I guide the work of the SNA in my class using a collaborative approach. If I have concerns about the students in my class, I know who to contact within the school and I'm aware of the referral process. I am aware of targets that a student is working on in their support classes and I support them to achieve those in my classroom, and I contribute to student support plans or progress reviews when asked to do so. And again, let's look at a couple of real life examples of that. So I've 2 examples to show you on this and I won't spend too much time on it. So these students are accessing support on a more intensive basis. The key SEN teacher working with them has shared this with their subject teachers. These are the targets being worked on. You can see there that the main areas of concern are around anxiety, friendships and clothing. And again, we don't know what category of disability this child may or may not have. We are just focused on their presenting needs and their targets. So if you were asked how you were supporting them, what would you say if you had to sit down with an inspector or a parent or whatever and you were asked what you're doing? Well, some simple measures might include, if you have them first period, let them know that you understand they might be feeling anxious because mornings are a pinch point for them, and ask how you might help them to settle in once they arrive. Try to spot opportunities, say, for them to be seated beside a student who will be sensitive to their friendship concerns. Show flexibility over the snood. That's the child who just won't take the snood or scarf off. Insisting that it has to be taken off could cause them huge distress and escalate into a meltdown for the student. And then again, explicit praise when you notice them make any improvements in those areas. And then you can say, if you're asked by the SEN teacher, are they achieving the targets in your classroom? You could say, well, actually, yes, I've seen great improvements there. It's definitely less frequent than it used to be. Another very common target, we've probably all seen these ones. So targets to reduce impulsive or attention seeking behaviour. So again, I just took these, it was a snapshot from some behaviour for learning materials. So to remain in his or her seat until asked to be moved, to do what's asked without swearing or arguing, and avoid calling out in class. So again, these students may apply to many students who have an assessed need or have no assessed need at all. They could be attending support through the mainstream SENCO, the special class coordinator or the BFL. What can you do in your class to help them achieve these targets? Are your expectations realistic as to how long it may take? First step is to check in with the key teacher working with them on this. Do they have a plan in terms of frequency? And a good way to support students with targets like this is to tell them you know they're working hard to improve in these areas and reassure them that you'll do your best to support them. There is a strategy called Catch Them Being Good, which I don't really like the name, but it does what it says on the tin, praising their improvements and successes, and be explicit as to the positive impact it's had on your day. For example, I really appreciated how hard you tried today not to shout out or argue, and I really enjoyed teaching the class. I think we got a lot done and I hope you enjoyed it too. And I'm going to do a little bit here on planned movement breaks, because this can be a huge issue for some children, and I'm just conscious of time, so I'm just going to flick over it. So planning a movement break can be a very powerful, inclusive tool within the classroom. But the key here is to communicate to pupils what's allowed or what's not allowed. So you might be happy to allow them to move freely for some of these tasks, and others you would prefer that they ask permission, but you need to tell them that. They need to be very clear on it. Okay, so just to finish off this session then, Being able to articulate and report on inclusive practice in your classroom at all levels of the continuum, as we saw, support for all, support for some, and support for a few, you're actually having a very big impact on the provision of other supports for students. So you're probably well aware that principals, SENCOs and guidance counsellors are now required to make very key decisions and judgments around supports that in previous years would have been made by outside agencies like NEPS or the NCSE. Your contribution is supporting them to gather data and evidence of supports. It's really the big thing now is evidence of support. This evidence, together with other information, say school level testing, may help school staff and management make those very important decisions. So just to hone in on race for a second, obviously we don't know until third year what accommodations a student might qualify for. That said, by offering them the choice from first year onwards of handing up content in a variety of formats like typed or voice recorded, you're giving them the chance to practice these skills throughout junior cycle. Even if they don't qualify then for race by the time they get there, you've actually helped them to embed skills for lifelong learning. All right. And bang on time, Fiona. Thanks again